A few months ago, I said the iPhone 15 Pro Max was the best smartphone camera in the world. But can the new Samsung S24 Ultra now beat it? Let's find out. As usual, for the very first test, I decided to see just how good these bad boys would do in normal point-and-shoot conditions using their standard cameras. And straight off the bat, the Ultra's standard wide photo just looked better to me overall. However, it did have that bluish-green tint to it again, which I've seen before on Samsung phones. But when you look in the shadows, Samsung did have more details and did just look slightly better. By the way, I took all the Ultra's pictures in 50 megapixels because they naturally look better, and the iPhone's in 48 megapixels. So then I changed over to the ultra-wide cameras on both phones, and I noticed the exact same characteristics. The Samsung managed to capture way more details in the shadows, even when pointed towards the sun, which the iPhone again just really struggled with. But when pointed away from the sun and just taking a normal ultra-wide photo, both these phones got almost identical results with almost identical colors. It's only when you zoom in that you notice Samsung's actually looks better and is less over-sharpened than iPhone. I also wanted to see just how good the Ultra's 200 megapixel photo looked against the 48 megapixel on iPhone, and to no surprise, the Ultra's photos did manage to look better, especially when looking at all that detail on the lamppost and even in the background cityscape. So most of the time, if you whip out both these phones and take a quick shot, the Ultra will take the better picture, so it gets the points, but what about video? So in my past camera comparison videos, iPhone usually takes the win for video, but I gotta say, the S24 Ultra stepped it up this year. Using the standard wide camera in 4K and shooting in daylight, both these phones managed to capture almost identical video. The only difference I noticed was iPhones came out slightly more contrasted, especially if you look at the clouds. And the same thing was true when shooting directly into the sun. iPhone is slightly more contrasted, and if you take a closer look, it also had more detail. But I was really surprised with just how similar these videos looked. Then I decided to test out the Ultra's 8K and iPhone's 4K. On closer inspection, I was surprised that the details on the Ultra looked a lot more refined and natural, and not as over-sharpened as on the iPhone. I also tested stabilization using Super Steady and Action Mode, and as you can see, they were both super steady, with the only difference being that iPhone can actually use its zoom lens with stabilization. But otherwise, again, these two are shockingly similar to compare against each other, even with stabilization. So while these both look very similar when you just whip them out and shoot a video, the iPhone just has that little bit extra detail and that 5x zoom stabilization, so it gets the point. So both of these have had some pretty big upgrades to their zoom cameras. The S24 Ultra now comes with a massive new 50 megapixel 5x zoom, and the iPhone 15 Pro Max now also has a 5x zoom with 12 megapixels. So let's see the results. Straight off the bat, I got some great looking photos from both of them. I do, however, prefer the Ultra's photo more, because if you take a closer look at it, you'll actually see that it managed to keep in a lot of detail in those shadows, which once again, the iPhone couldn't do. But I just gotta say, the zoom pics that these phones can take are honestly so impressive. So then I try to push them to their max digital zoom, which is 100 times on the Ultra and 25 times on the iPhone. And if you zoom in equally, you can clearly see just how much the iPhone struggles, and that's because you can get more detail from the Ultra's 50 megapixel sensor. The Ultra also has that new AI that automatically enhances any digital zoom photo it takes. So although the 15 Pro Max caught up to the older S23 Ultra zoom, the S24 Ultra got some major improvements with its sensor and its processing, giving it the point. Okay, so no matter how good the main camera is, it's never going to be good enough unless the selfie camera is also good. And there's no doubt that both these can take some sweet selfies. Using the ultra-wide lens, they can both take some really wide photos, but I noticed that the iPhone's is a smidge wider than the Ultra. Its color also looked more natural, and the Ultra had this kind of orange wash over it, which really changed my skin tone. And both these still have their standard 12 megapixel selfie cameras, which is honestly good enough for most use cases. And because they both have 12 megapixel selfie sensors, the quality you get from both of them is basically exactly the same, but the Samsung does tend to over sharpen, especially if you look at my cap, which the iPhone didn't have a problem with. I also posted these selfies to socials, and interestingly, a lot of people thought that the original Samsung picture was taken by the iPhone and vice versa, but it wasn't. I think that's because we're all kind of used to seeing that bluish tint on Samsung pics, but now it's not there? Interesting. As for nighttime selfies, the Samsung had that beautiful nighttime glow to it that you guys know I'm a fan of, but again, that orange tint is just ruining it for me. So because the iPhone has a little bit better color accuracy when taking selfie pics, it gets the point, but what about selfie videos? Now, the selfie video cameras on these haven't had any big hardware upgrades in a while, just a few software upgrades to help with processing. And at first, I didn't notice that much of a difference between the two, but I did notice that the Samsung had a bit more color accuracy and helped push the details from my jackets, but the iPhone made me look pretty pale. And to really push selfie videos, I also tested them at night, and this is where you can see both front cameras just can't handle low light. iPhone's is too dark, and the Samsung's exposed correctly but was too noisy. Honestly, they both kind of looked like they were filmed on potatoes. And by the way, in case you're wondering, this is what the audio sounds like on the S24 Ultra, and this is what the audio sounds like on the 15 Pro Max. Good to know. So if you do a lot of video calls or vlogging, the Ultra is actually the better option, and I personally would have chosen to post the Ultra's videos over the iPhones every single time. So it gets the point. So smartphones are now almost as good as professional cameras for 4 main reasons. And the very first reason is because of portrait mode, which can add fake blur to your photos. From my testing, the iPhone did a great job. As for the Samsung, it was also almost just as good. But once you start digging a bit deeper, you start to see the little issues with it that actually make a bigger difference. And to specifically put portrait mode to the test, I decided to wear this fluffy beanie, and just as I predicted, the S24 Ultra still struggles with edge detection. Especially with the fluff on the beanie, it kind of looks like a paper cutout. And what I really like about the iPhone is that you can change what the photo is focused on after you've taken the picture, which the S24 Ultra still can't do. I also tested out portrait mode with a few animals just to see how good it was, and as you can see, both these phones did such a great job. In some cases, it really looks like these pics were taken with a professional camera. But again, with all these pictures, I could still go back and change the focus on the iPhone's photos even after I had taken the pictures, whereas on the Samsung, you still cannot do that. So if by next year you can edit the focus on the Ultra, then it might take the point, but for now, I gotta give it to the iPhone. Now, the second reason why smartphone cameras are getting just as good as professional cameras is because of portraits or cinematic video. And both the S24 Ultra and 15 Pro Max are really good at this. I was so surprised because, as you guys can see, these two are just shockingly similar now. The Ultra really has had a massive improvement compared to before. I also tested out their 2x zoom to see just how good the Ultra has gotten, and again, the Ultra came out insanely similar to the iPhone, and honestly, the only difference that I saw between the two is that the Ultra was just slightly less stable than the iPhone, but barely noticeable. And let's not forget, the iPhone's advantage is that you can still go back and edit the focus after you've taken the video because it's gone and captured all that depth information. So ultimately, although it's like looking at the same video, with iPhone I can always go back and change the focus of the video whenever I want to, but with the Ultra you just cannot do that. So if by next year you can edit the focus on the Ultra, then it might take the point, but for now I gotta give it to the iPhone. Then for the third reason why smartphones are getting just as good as pro cameras is because they can actually shoot raw photos. And again, at first I didn't actually see that much of a big difference between them. They both took some great raw photos using their 50 and 48 megapixel resolution with the standard 1x zoom. And up close, they pretty much have just as much detail in comparison to one another, but just like the Ultra's standard point and shoot photos, most of the time I actually preferred its photos over the iPhone's. I also noticed that Samsung's raw photos were slightly brighter than the iPhone's, which is not that big of a deal because you can always edit them in post. But what I also liked about the Ultra's pics is that great nighttime glow that you get with it, which I'm a big fan of. Overall though, because of how much I love that nighttime glow on Samsung, its brighter look, and also how much easier it is to work with its raw photos, it takes this one for pro photos. And for the fourth reason why smartphones are so similar to pro cameras now is because of pro video. And both the Samsung and iPhone use HDR10, which has even been used to shoot short films. And with HDR10, they're both able to capture extra bright and extra dark videos using their pro video modes. So they're both super detailed, but the iPhone takes it a step further by shooting in a really desaturated color profile called log. And right away, a problem I noticed with the Ultra is just how jittery it was using the 3x zoom and using the standard 1x zoom. Although it looked prettier than the iPhone's details were a lot more refined and natural. And another problem I found with the Ultra was just how dark it was when shooting into the sun in comparison to the iPhone, which used log to capture a lot more information and detail in the darker areas. The Ultra also struggled a bit with exposure shifting, so it was always getting brighter and darker, but the iPhone barely ever flinched. A big plus to the Ultra though is that it now shoots real 4K slow-mo at 120 frames per second, which the iPhone is stuck at doing in standard HD. And as you can see, it looks so damn good and can come in really handy for getting some cool cinematic shots, and its slow-mo is just much better than the iPhone's. So even though I definitely appreciate the 4K slow-mo on the Ultra, the log pro video format on the iPhone just is better, giving it the point. Now, one thing that smartphone cameras have to be really good at is nightography, because let's not lie, a lot of us love to take those pretty nighttime photos. So straight away, you may not notice that much of a difference between the two. The Ultra is beautiful as always, but the iPhone also looks just as good. And the only difference is that the Ultra manages to capture more detail than the iPhone. And even though they both use the exact same 12 megapixel resolution, the Ultra usually had more detail in it. But honestly, overall, if you aren't pixel peeping like how I did, the iPhone in some cases did look better than the Ultra. Then using the ultra-wide lenses, they both took some very similar photos again, with only a few very slight differences like that beautiful glow that the Ultra is known for. But when I started taking more photos with the other lenses, only then could I see the massive difference between the two. Like this 3x zoom shot where on the Ultra you can clearly see just how much more detail you get in bright areas. The iPhone also had all these lens artifacts on every single picture, which it's had a problem with this kind of thing for years. So this one was a close call between the Ultra and iPhone, but because the Ultra's nighttime photos were more vivid, I gotta give it the point, making them now tie with one category left. Let's see what happens. So nighttime video is where smartphone cameras really struggle because their small sensors are normally prone to a lot of noise. So this one was actually very tough because, as you guys can see, both videos look so similar and this just blew my mind. So I really had to nitpick and find a difference between the two. While iPhone seemed to have some extreme lens flares, the only other thing that made them look a bit different was that the Samsung video was just slightly noisier than the iPhone's, but you can barely even notice it. So I gotta give credit to Samsung because they've been struggling with night video for a couple of years and it looks like they've got it figured out. And while iPhone's was less noisy, if you look at my face, beanie and hoodie, the colors are way less accurate than the Ultra's, which was way more vivid and true to real life. So both the Ultra and the iPhone do have their pluses and minuses. And the truth is, it was really difficult to tell the difference between them both, and not just in night video, but with most of the other categories as well. So they both get a point, making this a tie for the first time ever. So you can't actually go wrong with either one of these. They're both incredible phones, and to me are the best smartphone cameras in the world. But I'm still actually testing them both out to see which one is the better phone, so make sure you sub and stick around for that video, but I'll see you guys in the next one. Toodles!